Every so often, a country reaches a moment where it can no longer assume the world around it will remain predictable, friendly, or stable. Canada is standing at that moment now. With Donald Trump once again shaping U.S. policy and global behavior, Canada is being forced to confront a reality that many would rather avoid.
The United States is our neighbor. We have to adjust to the U.S. Pursuing a more explicit America First policy, a more transactional policy, a very transactional policy, not just more, a very transactional policy in economic affairs, a desire for us and other NATO partners to shoulder more of the responsibility of protecting our countries and NATO as a whole. The U.S. is right about a number of these things. Some of them we would disagree with, certainly in terms of us fulfilling our responsibilities. This government has stepped up.
This isn't about emotional reactions or partisan fear. It's about risk, exposure, and responsibility. And it's why defense, sovereignty, and military readiness have suddenly moved near the top of Canada's national agenda.
You gave the example, you prompted me on the defense spending, that $80 billion. That's an enormous amount of money. That's necessary to protect our Arctic. It's necessary to make sure the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have the right equipment. But a lot of that, instead of 70 cents on every dollar going south of the border to the United States defense contractors, a lot of that is now going to be spent here, and it's going to help develop other industries. So all of that puts us in a better position.
Trump's worldview is built on pressure politics, power assertion, and transactional relationships. When he re-enters the global arena, long-standing structures that once provided stability begin to erode. Agreements become leverage. Alliances turn into bargaining chips. Predictability becomes conditional. And when that happens, Canada doesn't watch from a safe distance. It becomes exposed alongside the United States.
Because, in effect, they have violated USMCA. We had certain protocols, side letters, agreements around the steel sector, around the auto sector and others, and what the U.S. has done in terms of those tariffs is not consistent with USMCA.
This is the conclusion many respected defense and security analysts are now drawing. Canada's vulnerability is not hypothetical. It is structural. Proximity, partnership, and alignment with an increasingly assertive U.S. place Canada directly within the blast radius of decisions it does not control. That is why Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is treating defense and sovereignty as matters of responsibility, not spectacle. This isn't about posturing or panic. It's about acknowledging that ignoring risk no longer feels prudent. It feels negligent. The pressure first resurfaced in familiar territory: trade. As discussions around the future of the USMCA agreement intensified, Trump signaled once again that he could walk away from the deal. His administration repeatedly claimed Canada was giving the United States a raw deal, despite industry leaders and economists praising the agreement's stability. Whether this was negotiation theater or genuine intent mattered less than the signal it sent. Canada's economic security was once again being treated as conditional. At a time of slowing growth, inflation pressure, and job uncertainty, even the possibility of a trade rupture carried enormous consequences for both countries. But what makes today's environment fundamentally more serious is that the conversation no longer stops at economics. Trump's recent pattern shows renewed comfort with global military assertiveness. From Venezuela to Greenland to missile strikes in distant regions, Washington's posture has grown more aggressive. And when the United States projects power this way, risk does not remain contained. Strategic rivals rarely see conflict in isolation. They see ecosystems of influence. And within those ecosystems, America's closest ally and physical neighbor becomes part of the same strategic equation. Canadian security experts are now warning that Canada's exposure is increasing simply because it exists within that orbit. Canada doesn't need to provoke anything to become vulnerable. It merely needs to remain adjacent to decisions shaped elsewhere. This is compounded by something many Canadians once dismissed as rhetorical excess. Trump's language toward Canada has never resembled the respectful partnership historically defining the relationship. Instead, it has often carried tones of dominance, ridicule, and ownership. References to annexation, casual talk of taking Canada, and framing sovereignty as negotiable were long brushed off as bluster. Today, analysts are urging Canadians to take that worldview more seriously. Not because annexation is imminent, but because language reveals mindset. Trump views power through exploitation. Weaken a partner and they become useful. Undermine sovereignty and leverage increases. Create dependence and influence follows. That is not paranoia, it is analysis grounded in Trump's own statements and behavior. This is why Canadian sovereignty is now being discussed in existential terms rather than hypothetical ones. For the first time in decades, Canadians are being told bluntly, do not assume respect is guaranteed. Mark Carney's government is operating within this reality. Canada has long believed in diplomacy, cooperation, and moral credibility as pillars of national security. Those values remain essential, but a world increasingly shaped by coercion and hard capability demands something more tangible. Carney appears to understand that goodwill alone is not a defense strategy. Rather than abandoning Canada's identity, his government is moving to protect it. Defense modernization is no longer framed as militarization, but as maturity. A sovereign nation should not rely entirely on the restraint of external leaders for its safety. It should possess the capability to defend itself if circumstances demand it. This distinction matters. Peace as a value remains intact. Peace as a guarantee does not exist without capability. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Arctic. Climate change is making Arctic territory more accessible. Strategic competition is accelerating. Russia and other powers see opportunity. If Canada cannot credibly protect its own Arctic, someone else will shape outcomes there instead. This is why Arctic security has become a central focus of Canada's defense planning. One of the clearest examples of this shift is the growing discussion around amphibious capability. For decades, Canada has lacked the ability to rapidly deploy forces, transport heavy equipment, or sustain operations across its own vast coastline and northern territories. Despite having one of the world's longest coastlines, Canada has operated without the kind of amphibious platforms that major global actors consider essential. That may be changing. An amphibious ship functions as a mobile base. It can deliver troops, vehicles, supplies, and humanitarian aid to remote areas without relying on ports or airstrips. In Arctic emergencies, natural disasters, or sovereignty operations, that capability is transformative. Canadian military planners have examined scenarios involving distressed northern communities in winter conditions. While improvisation through airlift and Coast Guard assets is possible, sustaining operations remains a challenge. An Arctic-capable amphibious platform would fundamentally alter that equation. It would allow Canada to defend its coastlines, protect the Arctic, assert sovereignty over remote regions, respond to humanitarian crises, and meaningfully contribute to allied operations when required. Crucially, this is not about preparing for war, it's about eliminating vulnerability. In international politics, weakness invites pressure. Capability deters it. The mere possession of credible capacity reduces the likelihood that anyone tests your resolve. Canada's Navy is now exploring concepts for domestically built, ice-capable landing ships. Preliminary discussions with Canadian shipyards have reportedly been promising. These ideas align with broader defense investments, with more than $80 billion being directed toward military modernization over the coming years.
This government has stepped up with the biggest increase in military spending effectively in our history. Or
I think it's 82
It will be 82 billion, exactly, over the course of over the next 5 years, starting with paying the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces properly.
Taken together, these moves signal something deeper than procurement. They reflect a government that is no longer willing to operate under illusion. Canada is not preparing because it wants confrontation. It is preparing because it refuses to assume instability will simply pass. A responsible government plans for the environment it may face, not the one it hopes for. Strength in this context is not provocation, it is protection. Carney's strategy is not about redefining Canada's values. It is about ensuring those values can survive in a world where unpredictability is becoming the norm again. Canada has never defined itself by aggression. It has defined itself by restraint, cooperation, and reason. None of that changes. What changes is the recognition that those principles must be defended, not merely hoped for. Trump thrives in environments where others hesitate. Carney is ensuring Canada will not be one of those nations. Investing in capability is not a rejection of diplomacy. It is the foundation that allows diplomacy to function from a position of dignity rather than dependence. In today's world, readiness is not a boast. It is discipline, it is maturity, and increasingly, it is the price of sovereignty.